Well, we stay with the Supreme Court because it has rejected a last-minute bid by President-elect Donald Trump to halt sentencing in his hush money case. The top court denied Mr. Trump's emergency application seeking to block Friday's sentencing by a 5-4 vote. He had been convicted in a New York court of covering up payments to an adult film performer. Two conservative judges joined the three liberals to reject Mr. Trump's bid to delay the hearing. This was his reaction to the decision.
Well, they called for an appeal, and as you know, they acknowledged what the judge said about no penalty, and there's no penalty. But we're going to appeal anyway, just psychologically, because frankly, it's a disgrace. It's a judge that shouldn't have been on the case. He's a highly conflicted judge, and they called for an appeal. So I read it, and I thought it was a fair decision, actually. So I'll do my little thing tomorrow. They can have fun with their political opponent.
The President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, has been physically prevented from leaving the country by federal law enforcement. He is currently detained on the tarmac of Palm Beach International Airport.
The Supreme Court just turned down a last-minute plea from President-elect Donald Trump to pause the sentencing in his hush money case. In a tight 5-4 vote, they denied Trump's emergency appeal to stop the hearing set for Friday. He had already been found guilty in a New York court for making payments to keep things quiet with an adult film performer. Interestingly, two conservative justices sided with three liberal ones to reject his request for a delay. In reaction to the news, Trump didn't hold back, describing the situation as a live, unprecedented constitutional crisis, and emphasized that this is really happening, not some rumor on social media. He acknowledged the judge's comments about not imposing a penalty, saying there technically wasn't any penalty, but he still wanted to appeal. He even expressed how he felt the judge was conflicted and shouldn't have been involved, calling the whole thing a disgrace. In an interesting twist, Donald Trump is currently stuck on the tarmac at Palm Beach International Airport, unable to leave the country due to federal law enforcement. It's quite a situation when the most powerful person in the world finds himself in such a bind, essentially ignoring a court order. I wonder what happens next. This kind of thing has never occurred in American history before. As we're sitting here in 2026, we're actually closer to this scenario than most people think, yet the mainstream media isn't really covering it in depth. It's not that it's not happening, but the details are complex, deeply legal, and a bit terrifying, making it difficult to fit everything into a quick segment. I'm going to break it all down right here, piece by piece, because this truly matters. But before diving deeper, let's keep it real. Headlines can be tricky to trust nowadays. That's why we've put together Pump Politics, to deliver genuine stories with real context and no corporate spin. If you want to stay informed, you know where to go. Let me fill you in on what went down. There was quite a serious legal showdown earlier today. In a federal courtroom, Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein made a ruling that wasn't just your typical legal jargon. It felt like a bombshell going off. He firmly dismissed Trump's final bid to evade his 34 felony convictions linked to the hush money scandal in New York. But it didn't stop there. The judge's warning was loud and clear. It echoed through the halls of the White House like an alarm bell. He called out Trump's ongoing tactics of stalling and refusing to follow court orders, declaring that he might even hold the current president in contempt of court. That was a pretty serious implication. So here's the scoop. Federal judges all over the country are starting to lose their patience. They're not just issuing orders, they're laying down deadlines and threatening fines, even jail time in some cases. Yet the Trump administration just isn't following through. It's as if they're ignoring these directives like they don't matter at all, treating the judicial system like it's merely optional. And here's the kicker. This isn't just about immigration or deportation flights to El Salvador. No, it dives into something much more fundamental. It raises the crucial question of whether our courts still hold any real authority at all. After all, if the executive branch can just brush off judges whenever it feels like it, we're in for a pretty chaotic ride. If we're at the point where a presidency can act without any consequences, it feels like we've lost the balance of our government. Instead of having that robust system of checks and balances, it seems like we're down to one branch, essentially the one with all the power, the toys, and the agents. Before I dive deeper, let me clarify something important. Trump hasn't actually been arrested. There hasn't been any dramatic scene with federal agents blocking Air Force One on the tarmac. That's just some viral fiction making the rounds on social media, and I'm not here to spread that. What we're focusing on is much more significant. We're exploring the real legal mechanisms that are at play. Specifically, what could happen if a federal court decided to issue a contempt warrant against someone in this administration. We're digging into the actual law and questioning if the system still has the strength to enforce itself. The truly surprising part? There's a legal framework for holding a president or their top officials in contempt, and it's been around since 1789. The real issue isn't whether that power is there, it's whether anyone has the courage to use it. Right now, a few federal judges are beginning to understand the implications of trying to enforce those laws. One judge in Minnesota, a George W. Bush appointee, mind you, not some liberal activist, has made a significant statement. He identified 96 separate court orders that ICE has ignored across 74 different cases. He noted, and I'm paraphrasing here because it's pretty striking, that he hasn't seen any instance in U.S. history where a federal court had to repeatedly threaten contempt just to get the government to comply with the law. Those are the words of a conservative judge expressing concern about the current administration. That's not a partisan issue. That's a serious matter reflecting a crisis in the rule of law. And it doesn't end there. This judge isn't the only one sounding the alarm. We're going to unpack all of this. Once you grasp how contempt works, what the U.S. Marshals can do, and how the legal landscape looks, you'll see this situation in a whole new light. So let's start from the very beginning, because quite a few folks don't really understand the ins and outs of this process yet. Since the very first session of Congress in 1789, our federal court system has been designed with a crucial tool called contempt of court. This is really straightforward. If someone doesn't follow a court order, the court has the power to punish them. This could mean imposing fines, applying sanctions, or in serious cases, sending someone to jail. The Supreme Court has even pointed out that this power is essential for maintaining the authority of the courts. Without it, court orders would just be meaningless pieces of paper, like decoration that doesn't actually hold any weight. If a legal system can't enforce its orders, it's more like a performance than real justice. Now let's talk about who actually enforces these contempt orders. When a judge decides someone must be held accountable, it's the job of the U.S. Marshal Service to step in. Most folks might not know much about the Marshals. They're not like the FBI or the CIA, and they definitely don't get the same glamorous portrayal. However, they are actually the oldest federal law enforcement agency in the country, created alongside the courts in 1789. By federal law, it's their official job to execute and enforce all orders from the federal courts. So when a judge issues a contempt order saying someone needs to face consequences, it's the marshals who carry out that order, making the arrest if it becomes necessary. But here's where things get a bit tricky, especially as we move into 2026. The marshals are part of the Justice Department, working under the direction of the Attorney General. That means, in theory, a president who has control over the Attorney General may also influence what the marshals do day to day. Right now, we're at this really interesting point where the courts are trying to give orders while the executive branch is in charge of actually enforcing them. It's a bit of a tug of war, and it's all playing out in real courtrooms across the country. Let's dive into some specific cases because they really highlight what's going on better than any broad discussion ever could. Back in early 2026, the Trump administration kicked off what they called Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota. It was quite the scene, with thousands of ICE agents deployed all at once to make mass arrests and rush people through deportation proceedings almost too fast for the courts to keep up. Eventually, judges began to take notice, including Chief Judge Patrick Schultz, a Bush appointee, who discovered that ICE had violated court orders not just once or twice, but 96 times across 74 different cases. Instead of just shaking his head and moving on, Judge Schultz got serious. He threatened criminal contempt, which carries potential jail time, much harsher than simply paying a fine. That really got the administration's attention. In that instance, they decided to comply. But Judge Schultz wasn't finished. His ruling was pretty straightforward. He pointed out that the court had been incredibly patient with the government. He indicated that previous, milder corrective measures had flopped, and he promised that if it happened again, he'd take whatever steps necessary to uphold the rule of law. Those are some strong words coming from a federal judge about the sitting administration. It's really hard to believe those kinds of statements are happening. Then we have another case, this time from Washington, D.C., which adds more drama to the mix. Federal Judge James Boasberg found that the Trump administration likely defied his orders regarding the deportation of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. They used something called the Alien Enemies Act to deport over 200 people, individuals who already had active court orders protecting them from being removed. The administration rushed those deportation flights out just before Judge Boasberg could intervene. He issued a stop order, but by then the planes were already in the air, and the administration just let it happen. It's wild. The discussion around the recent ruling is really something. Boasberg was very clear. He pointed out that the Constitution can't just sit back and let people ignore court orders, especially when those people have sworn to uphold it. He emphasized that turning a blind eye to this kind of defiance would essentially be mocking the Constitution itself. Those words are coming from a federal judge about the current administration, and that's quite a statement. But here's a twist that few seem to be talking about. It might just be one of the most pressing aspects of the entire situation. Some judges on the appeals court, who were appointed by Trump himself, actually intervened to halt Boasberg's investigation into contempt. They raised an intriguing point about whether Boasberg even has the right to look into contempt issues on his own, or if he needs to pass the baton to the Justice Department, the same one that serves Trump. This scenario opens up a massive can of worms. If courts can't handle their own contempt cases and everything has to go through the executive branch for a call on prosecution, then the executive is, in a sense, giving itself a free pass from judicial enforcement. Imagine a court order gets defied, and then the contempt case gets shuffled off to the Attorney General, who decides not to take any action. In that situation, the judge is left powerless, and so is every other court across the nation. Legal experts, including those who've worked in justice departments under both political parties, are sounding alarms. They warn that if this line of thinking prevails, it could create a loophole that lets the president and his team disregard court orders without any real repercussions, any order, any time. This isn't just a theory anymore. It's shaping up to be a real strategy. So let's break down the essentials here and look at what this means going forward, because the future is looking a bit unpredictable, and that should raise concerns for everyone, regardless of political views. First off, the legal trap is not just a concept. It's happening right now. The groundwork for holding the executive branch in contempt isn't something hypothetical debated in law schools. It's been established for over 200 years. Courts have successfully used it against governors and cabinet members before. It's interesting to think about how legal issues have popped up repeatedly in the government. Back in 2019, the Education Secretary found themselves in trouble for ignoring a court order related to student loans. Fast forward to 2022, and a New York court decided to hold Trump in civil contempt, hitting him with a fine of $10,000 every day. That really adds up, totaling $110,000, all because he wouldn't comply with a request for documents. While it's not exactly new for individuals or officials to get into legal hot water, the extent and pattern of defiance we're seeing now is definitely striking. One judge even commented that the administration's record in early 2026 likely included more violations of court orders in a single month than some federal agencies have committed throughout their entire existence. This isn't just a case of a few procedural errors. This reflects a clear, deliberate choice by the administration. Now, when we dive into the role of the marshals, things get trickier. It's essential to note that U.S. Marshals have a unique responsibility. They're bound by law to enforce all federal court orders, which essentially defines their existence. But they're also employees of the Department of Justice, a department run by the Attorney General, who is appointed by the President. This duality raises some real questions about what happens when the obligations clash. Imagine a scenario where a court issues a warrant for a high-ranking government official, and then the Attorney General asks the marshals to hold back. The situation becomes murky because, honestly, nobody has dealt with this kind of conflict on such a large scale before. Legal experts are currently in discussions about it, with some insisting that the marshal's duty to the court should come first, while others argue that federal law enforcement can't just go against their chain of command. A few serious legal analysts are cautiously warning that if we ever reach a point where marshals refuse to act on a court's warrant, we will truly be charting new and uncertain constitutional waters, areas that the founders didn't fully plan for. It's quite unsettling to see where our democracy finds itself these days. The conversation happening in the D.C. Circuit right now about whether judges can conduct their own contempt investigations or if they have to turn everything over to the Department of Justice is deeply concerning. This isn't just some technical chat. It's much bigger than that. It strikes at the heart of our judicial system, threatening to weaken it as an independent branch of government permanently. If that argument takes hold and courts buy into it, then the executive branch would essentially be able to ignore court orders without worrying about any real consequences. Courts might talk a lot and issue orders, but if the only ones able to enforce those orders work for the very person being held in contempt, we end up in a closed loop. It essentially crumbles under its own weight, and the fallout wouldn't stop with this administration. Any future president, whether Democrat, Republican, or anything else, would inherit that same kind of unchecked power. This would create a system where the president is almost impossible to rein in. Now let's shift gears for a moment because this isn't just a legal issue. It's impacting real lives right now. We can't forget the human side of this complicated legal landscape. Behind all those contempt orders and constitutional debates are actual people, immigrants who have faced detention without warrants, individuals who had active court orders meant to protect them but still got deported, and those currently sitting in prisons in El Salvador even after a federal judge said they shouldn't be there. When courts stop enforcing their orders and the system breaks down, it's always the most vulnerable who pay the price first. These are the folks without lawyers, without resources, unable to navigate a system that was already confusing before it started overlooking its own rules. So yes, this is a discussion about constitutional law and the separation of powers, but at its core, it's also about the impact on everyday people when those protections disappear and no one steps in to restore them. So what comes next? It's essential to consider the realistic paths forward in all this. The situation we're facing is pretty complex, and there are a few ways it could play out. We might see the court staying strong for now. Judges could continue to issue contempt orders, and the administration might keep caving at the last minute to avoid triggering a full-blown constitutional crisis after openly defying a judicial order. That seems to be the pattern we've noticed, pushing things to the edge, then pulling back and pushing somewhere else. It's exhausting and kind of damaging, but at least the system hasn't completely broken down yet. On the flip side, we could enter a phase of escalation. At some point, the administration might decide it's done pulling back and opts for an open confrontation. That's when it'll get really interesting because we'll see if the judiciary actually has enough support, not just from the public but also from Congress and even within the executive branch, to enforce its authority. This kind of unpredictability definitely keeps those legal scholars up at night. Then there's the third scenario, which honestly sends chills down my spine. It's the idea of a slow erosion of judicial authority. No big confrontations, no moments that future generations will cling to in textbooks, just a gradual decline over time. While the courts keep issuing orders, the administration might start to ignore most of them. Fines would remain small and manageable, and over time, people might just accept that courts can no longer compel the executive branch to do anything it doesn't want to do. This scenario is terrifying because there's no clear line to mark when it all fell apart. It just happens slowly and quietly. By the time everyone agrees there's a crisis, the damage could already be done and the precedent set. So, where do I stand in all of this? Here we are in the year 2026, and the system for enforcing judicial rulings is under more pressure than it has been in a long time. Judges are trying their best to hold everything together with the resources they have. Some tools are working while others are facing significant challenges from higher courts. Right now, whether or not our system survives or if checks and balances actually mean anything moving forward is still very much up in the air. It's definitely not settled. We're seeing decisions being made in courtrooms that most folks never get to hear about, one case at a time, one hearing after another. I'm committed to keeping an eye on every single one of these developments. What I want to do is share the real story with you, not some viral fiction or the diluted corporate take. This channel is all about bringing you the facts as they are. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join the newsletter. It's totally free and the link's right in the description. Trust me, the next part of this story is going to unfold quickly, and you definitely want to stay ahead of it. I'll catch you in the next update.